Merci Jean-Pierre, merci à tous les orateurs qui vont se succéder à cette estrade, à ce micro, d'être venus, d'avoir répondu à l'invitation de ce très beau colloque. Je voulais remercier le Pays Basque de nous accueillir tous les ans, et pas le jour du colloque, mais nous accueillir tout le temps et d'avoir cette possibilité de demander au soleil et à la bonne humeur d'être toujours présente. Je dirais que le Pays Basque ne fait pas beaucoup d'efforts, il est souvent comme ça. Alors moi je vais faire comme toi, puisque nous avons le même défaut, m'interrompre rapidement pour permettre à nos amis américains de venir nous parler de leur expérience. Et je souhaiterais, pour donner un maximum de possibilités à l'échange, concernant un sujet qui, comme tout le monde le sait, fait polémique, et malheureusement on n'arrive pas à avancer, parce qu'il y a des postures idéologiques, alors que le débat permet probablement à un moment ou à un autre d'arriver à des situations d'échange. Alors je vais inviter le professeur Herbert KLEBER et le professeur Bout à me rejoindre pour pouvoir débuter ce premier débat sur le cannabis. Je vais présenter le professeur Herbert KLEBER, qui est professeur donc, de psychiatrie et d'addictologie à l'Université de Columbia. Il est directeur de la division des addictions à l'Université de Columbia. Herbert.
My appreciation to the organizers of this event, and especially to Jean-Pierre for his great hospitality, both now and 2 years earlier. I'm going to speak about medical marijuana, the myths and the realities. And as you can see, okay, you can't see anything until it advances. Okay, good. Marijuana has been demonized, glorified, and recently attempted to be medicalized. This presentation is divided into 2 parts. The first part will cover information about marijuana and new approaches to treat it. The second part will cover what is known about marijuana as medicine. As you know, marijuana is a very, very old plant. It goes back to at least 2700 BC. But I especially want you to see that fourth bullet there, that the role of the French. That is when General KLEBER, Jean-Baptiste KLEBER, no relation, invaded Egypt for Napoleon. They discovered marijuana and hashish, and during that Egyptian campaign, and brought it back to Europe, where it became very popular. Unfortunately, not too long after that, General KLEBER was assassinated by an angry Egyptian. More than 75 million Americans, over 1/3, have tried marijuana at least once, and 18 million have used it in the last month. The average age of first use has been declining. Okay. While most discontinue marijuana by their mid-20s, a small percentage maintain daily long-term use. 10% of first-time users and 50% of people who use it daily will develop dependence, both psychological and physical. The daily use by our teenagers is the highest it has been in 30 years. And the fact that there are now 20 states with so-called medical marijuana is, I am sure, one of the reasons for this. What is the relationship between marijuana and other drug use? Early age of onset is a major predictor of continued frequent marijuana use and the likelihood of using other drugs. Marijuana today is much more potent than it has been in the past. If you'll remember, John Lennon called marijuana a harmless giggle back in the early 70s. That was when marijuana was about 1 or 2%. Now marijuana is between 15 and 30%. What does that mean? It means that it makes the brain less responsive to the endogenous cannabinoids, the chemicals in the brain, especially in the still developing adolescent brain. It means also more rapid intoxication and with smaller amounts, sort of similar to what you see with vodka versus beer, that as you markedly increase the potency in small amounts, you get more rapid intoxication. And in teens, we see an increased anxiety and apathy, and it makes other drug use seem more desirable. The main active ingredient, delta-9 THC, was isolated by Rafi Meshulam in 1964. There's at least 400 other compounds and at least 60 other cannabinoids. The key one is CBD, cannabidiol, which has the interesting property of being anti-THC and antipsychotic. The street potency of marijuana has increased substantially in the past 3 decades, from the 1% we've just talked about to 5 to 10%, and in some of the medical marijuana dispensaries, it gets as high as 15 to 30%. This shows the increased potency over the last 2 decades of marijuana that has been seized. And as you can see, from being in very, very low numbers, suddenly in the mid-1990s, you see this rapid takeoff. And remember, it was around 1996 when California became the first for the so-called medical marijuana. And now you see the potency is much, much higher than it used to be. Marijuana can be taken by a number of routes. The most common is the smoked, where you have the rapid onset of the high, and major physiological and subjective effects take up to 30 minutes to develop. You have peak plasma levels develop in 10 minutes, and intoxication lasts a couple hours. By the oral route, such as marijuana brownies, but also by a chemical that is approved by the FDA, dronabinol, which is a Schedule 3, sorry. You have a greater percentage absorbed, but less predictable effects, much slower onset, peak plasma level in 2 to 3 hours, and the effects last up to 8 hours. The endocannabinoid system, which is the brain's own marijuana, you have the CB1 receptor was cloned and activated, shown to be activated by THC. There are 2 major cannabinoid receptors, CB1 and CB2. CB1 is concentrated primarily in the cortex, where it affects cognitive functioning, in the hippocampus, where it affects memory, and in the cerebellum, where it affects motor coordination. CB2 receptors are mainly located in cells of the immune system, but recently have been identified also in the brainstem, cortex, and cerebellum. There are 2 main endogenous ligands, anandamide, which is Sanskrit for bliss. It was discovered and named by Rafi Meshulam, and I was at a meeting where someone asked him why, as an Israeli, he gave a Sanskrit name for bliss, and his response was, because we don't have a good Hebrew word for bliss. We have words for pain, for suffering, for unhappiness, but not for bliss. And so he named it Anand, which is Sanskrit for bliss, and then it's an amide. And then the other endogenous ligand is 2-arachidonyl glycerol. The CB1 receptors may regulate reinforcing effects of alcohol and mediate alcohol relapse. In heavy drinkers, one drink tends to increase endorphins in 2 key brain regions. The CB1 receptors have important roles in opioid rewards. One of the most fascinating things in the brain are the interconnections between the opioid system and the cannabinoid system. There's a cross-dependence. For example, if you take a rat and you addict the rat to THC, and then you give that rat naloxone, it precipitates marijuana withdrawal. If you take another rat and you make that rat addicted to morphine, and then you give them a THC antagonist like rimonabant, it precipitates an opiate withdrawal. So the two systems are very closely tied together in the brain, and one of the things we are doing now at Columbia is trying to study these connections and trying to come up with medications that may take advantage of these interconnections. Potential side effects, you can see here respiratory effects, where acutely it dilates the bronchial tubes, chronically it decreases bronchial diameter and worsens breathing problems, leading to chronic coughs and bronchitis. It increases the heart rate and the cardiac workload, and if there's any problems with the heart, it may be more likely to produce heart attacks. You have slowing of time, increased hunger, the so-called munchies, and slowed reaction time. Also, of course, it increases risk-taking behavior, and that's especially a problem when you're dealing with teenagers, because as we know, the adolescent brain is not really mature until the mid-20s. And so you have the risk-taking part of the brain, which matures early in the teens. It's the part of the brain that says go, that tells you to take risks. And then the part that says, whoa, be careful, that doesn't fully mature until the late 20s. Potential side effects, suspiciousness, paranoia. Aggressiveness is usually decreased, but it can increase if marijuana is taken during high stress. And one of the things that we worry about very much is increase in road, rail, and air accidents. In one study, I think something like 1 out of 3 fatal accidents, the individual had used marijuana within 3 hours of driving. At higher doses, you may have hallucinations, usually visual, and at times paranoid delusions, panic reactions and confusion, and suicide attempts are more common in those that meet criteria for marijuana abuse and dependence. It decreases memory. So one of the standard jokes is that if you remember the 1960s, it means you weren't there, because it does affect memory. It decreases concentration, attention, information processing. If you begin marijuana prior to the age of 17, you have poorer cognitive performance compared to the late onset, even after you've been off the marijuana for over a month. The verbal IQ is especially affected, but largely reversible. Persistent marijuana users show broad neuropsychological decline as late as 25 years, even after stopping their marijuana use. Is marijuana a precipitating or a causative factor in the development of schizophrenia, or is it both? Originally it was thought that marijuana increased the likelihood of schizophrenia only in those individuals that had a genetic propensity to it. We now know that it can cause a psychotic reaction, including something that resembles schizophrenia very much, even in individuals that lack any kind of genetic propensity. I've been treating recently a young man from an Ivy League school, no family history of schizophrenia, and he was a very heavy marijuana user, and in his third year at college, he became acutely psychotic and had to drop out. The psychosis was to a great extent reversed by Clozaril, but he refused to stop the marijuana use, which is how he arrived in my tender, loving care. And he was very hard to convince to stop the marijuana use. I tried the dronabinol, that did not work. And so I improvised, as any good psychiatrist does, and I called in his mother, who was a good Jewish mother, and said, it's your job to get him to stop his marijuana use. What you need to do is you need to call him in and say, look, after all I've done for you, the least you can do is stop marijuana for 1 year. And it worked, or at least it did work. He's now in his 11th month and is talking about maybe going back. So I need to see if there's any other rabbits I can pull out of the hat. When you do become psychotic, marijuana can aggravate the symptoms in a course of schizophrenia and increase relapse even when premorbid psychotic symptoms are controlled for. In over 3/4 of individuals who have a psychotic reaction, a diagnosis of a schizophrenia type disorder occurs in almost 50% within 3 years. One of the key studies on this was a meta-analysis in Lancet in 2007. The editors of Lancet began that issue by saying, we apologize for what we said some years earlier when we said that marijuana was a harmless drug. The information that has come forward in the article in this issue of Lancet convinces us we should tell the government to take a much harder stand toward marijuana than we did in the past. Daily use is associated with the hallmarks of classic dependence. Heavy use, such as 2 to 10 joints a day. You have impaired performance, compulsive drug-seeking behavior, and 10% of those who have ever smoked marijuana will at some point become dependent. The more pleasurable the substance produces, the greater the likelihood you will become dependent. As far as treatment, there are a number of psychotherapeutic approaches that are listed here, but unfortunately, even though the results of these various studies are reasonably good, 71% relapse within 3 months after stopping the psychological treatment. So we feel very strongly that psychological treatments can be helpful, but what we really need now is a medication. To begin with, we need one to deal with the marijuana withdrawal, as many people find it hard to stop. If you look at that list of marijuana withdrawal, what does it remind you of? Nicotine withdrawal. The symptoms are remarkably similar to both cigarette withdrawal and marijuana withdrawal, with one key difference. When you stop smoking, you gain weight. As I know very well, having smoked 2 packs a day for 25 years, and when I stopped, I managed to gain about 20 to 25 pounds. Whereas in marijuana, you have the exact opposite. When you stop smoking marijuana, appetite decreases and weight decreases. And we showed that at Columbia initially in 1999, Meg Haney from our group. So what about pharmacological approaches? The marijuana withdrawal, there have been a number of negative studies. The most promising is a combination of dronabinol and lofexidine, which is an alpha-2 adrenergic agonist used for opiate withdrawal, or nabilone, which is another synthetic. Sativex is not yet available in the US. It is approved in Canada. It's a mixture of 1-to-1 of THC and cannabidiol, and it's used in Canada to treat the spasms and neuropathic pain associated with multiple sclerosis. And we're hoping that when it gets available in the US that we can try it for various research. I don't know whether, is it available in France? It is? Okay. So you should try it for various things. Given the high relapse rate from the psychotherapy, we clearly need pharmacologic approaches. Again, Meg Haney from our group showed that if you combine lofexidine with dronabinol, that you had markedly less of the way of withdrawal symptoms. As far as preventing reinstatement, naltrexone is a very mixed bag. Sometimes, depending on the dose, it may or may not help. Dronabinol lofexidine is useful, but not useful enough. Rimonabant may have been helpful, but is no longer available in the US, and I think in the European Union also, because of potential suicidality. I like nabilone, which is another synthetic THC. It has higher bioavailability than dronabinol, longer duration of action, and unlike dronabinol, which will give you positive urine for THC, dronabinol does not show up as THC in the urine, so you can tell whether the person is still using. There's been some interest in N-acetylcysteine, which is an over-the-counter supplement. After an 8-week double-blind controlled study, individuals who received the NAC had twice the odds of negative cannabinoid urines compared to placebo, 41% compared to 21% for placebo. So to summarize marijuana and then quickly turn to medical marijuana, over the last 3 decades, potency has increased, age of onset has decreased, more are seeking treatment. Marijuana withdrawal has now been reliably documented. After chronic heavy marijuana use, cessation can be very difficult, and there is increasing evidence of the involvement of marijuana use in mood and anxiety, earlier onset of schizophrenia and schizophrenia relapse. So, medical marijuana, compassionate intervention, or an oxymoron. There is no other approved medication by the smoked root. It's potentially carcinogenic. One marijuana cigarette deposits about as much tar as 4 tobacco cigarettes. It's even worse with blunts because of the tobacco wrap. It's very difficult to deliver the exact dose by the smoked root. And unfortunately, we have a reasonably good system of drug approval in the United States via FDA approval. And the last time we had approval by state referenda or legislation was, for those of you who remember the 1980s, when a substance called Laetrile, which was from apricot pits, was pushed as a treatment for cancer. And it was approved by a number of state legislators and turned out to be both ineffective and potentially lethal. So FDA approval has helped keep both dangerous and ineffective medications off the market. And you remember the old saying, the plural of anecdote is not data. So what does the scientific evidence show about efficacy? First of all, in most of the medical marijuana states, you can't really tell the purity or potency of the marijuana. Could be 5% or could be 15%. It could be as high as 30%. You can have contamination by molds, fungi, or sprays. And cannabidiol, which, as I mentioned earlier, is a very important cannabinoid, in a number of states, growers deliberately breed out cannabidiol because it's a relatively cheap way of enhancing the amount of THC, because you get rid of the anti-THC effects of the cannabidiol. Are there appropriate alternatives so you don't need medical marijuana? Well, we've mentioned dronabinol, which is approved by the FDA, and nabilone also. There are other existing medications for pain, for nausea, for cachexia, for glaucoma, etc. In fact, glaucoma would not be a good indication for medical marijuana because it also restricts blood flow to the optic nerve. The role of the physician, I have a commentary in the American Journal of Psychiatry a year ago, in which basically Bob Dupont and I argued that physicians who give these medical marijuana cards may be guilty of medical malpractice, since they cannot really determine what it is the patient is going to get. You don't know the dose, you don't know the potency, you don't know the frequency that they use, so how can a responsible physician say, here's this card, go out and get as much of this as you want. In one survey, only 2 of 500 doctors say they would issue a medical marijuana card, and in a number of these states you have very few physicians who write for tens of thousands of these medical marijuana cards. It's very, very lucrative. In one newspaper article in the New York Times, the reporter who was allowed to sit in when the when the individual seeking the medical marijuana card was interviewed, the whole interview took 4 minutes, no history, no physical, 2 questions. Do you have any condition for which marijuana might be helpful? Yeah, doc, my back is killing me. Do you have any indication for which marijuana might be harmful? Of course not. Okay, go out, see my receptionist, pay her $150, and she'll give you the medical marijuana card. After the individual goes out, the doctor turns to the reporter and says, I made $1 million last year, working only 3 days a week, and the good news is they need a new card every year. So what about the proposed medical uses of cannabinoids? Antiemetic for severe nausea and vomiting associated with cancer chemotherapy. Again, we have a number of good medications for that. The loss of appetite associated with AIDS or cancer. That may be a potential use for it. The effects of Sativex and multiple sclerosis could be another, but hopefully that will soon be on the market, as it is in Canada. Pain management, especially neuropathic pain, rheumatoid arthritis, and then in California, they list all these things, and then they say, anything an individual feels marijuana may be useful for. But again, the plural of anecdote is not data. Or as I said 20 years ago in a paper, the grass makes the other side of the hill look greener. Most of the studies that claim marijuana is helpful have used the oral THC, not the smoked THC. Okay. So the key issues are, what are the effects on teenage use? The best predictors of teenage use are perceived risk and perceived social disapproval. In 2011, the highest 12th grade daily use in 30 years. So among our high school seniors, we have an enormous jump. So from my sources, what I hear is that so-called medical marijuana is primarily a stalking horse for legalization of recreational use, which we now have in 2 states and are going to hear about in 1 state very shortly. This shows about adolescent use, and you see the top line at the far left is use in the past year, and the bottom line is perceived risk. And as perceived risk goes up, use goes down. As perceived risk goes down, use goes up. So why are we concerned about medical marijuana? Increased adolescent and young adult use, 10% are likely to become dependent, smuggling of large amounts of marijuana to non-medical marijuana states, increased auto accidents, and hard to close even when cities want to. In Los Angeles, the city council voted 14-0 to close all of the medical marijuana dispensaries. Within 3 months, they were open again. A combination of money and lawyers. So once you let the so-called cat out of the bag, it's very hard to put it back in. To summarize, most users do not have any of the serious conditions for which proponents claim there's a need. Most evidence of effectiveness is anecdotal. Where it can be effective, there are existing approved medications. The IOM report said there is little future in smoked marijuana as a medically approved medication. Its future lies in its components. Both the public and the medical field have taken marijuana use too lightly, leading to increased use and more casualties. Thank you.
Merci, professeur KLEBER. Je pense qu'on peut prendre quelques questions et d'abord répondre à la question que vous avez posée. Il y a à peu près 1 mois, la firme qui développe le Sativex a déposé une demande d'autorisation de mise sur le marché et le dossier est à l'étude au niveau de l'agence qui enregistre les médicaments en France. Donc, dans une indication que vous avez montrée, c'est-à-dire non pas dans le cadre d'un traitement de la dépendance ou bien de l'usage du cannabis, mais dans une dimension de traitement de la douleur, notamment dans la sclérose en plaques. Ce que vous avez montré tout à l'heure, M. KLEBER, concernant le risque, entre guillemets, d'un détournement du Sativex ou bien du cannabis thérapeutique à des fins récréatives, ce sont des arguments qui ont été développés également par ceux qui s'opposent au cannabis thérapeutique en France. Ce qui est rassurant parce que nous pensions que nous avions un débat franco-français. Il semblerait que les choses ne soient pas simplement cantonnées à notre périmètre hexagonal, c'est-à-dire la France. Voilà. Yes?
The advantage of Sativex is that it's a 1-to-1 ratio of THC and cannabidiol, so it's much safer.
Je voudrais vous poser une question, ensuite me tourner vers la salle, puisque vous l'avez énoncé. Ce qui est intéressant dans le Sativex, c'est que nous avons un ratio de 1 pour 1, et que nous connaissons, donc les études ont montré, et l'expérience de ceux qui l'ont prescrit, que le cannabidiol que vous avez montré a un effet antipsychotique ou plutôt protecteur vis-à-vis de l'effet psychoticogène du THC. Les études l'ont démontré. Or, il y a un travail qui a été montré d'abord surtout aux États-Unis, montrant que depuis 1993 à peu près, on a aux États-Unis, on a peu le faire en Europe, encore moins en France, analysé les échantillons qui ont été récupérés par la police et les douanes. Et on s'est rendu compte qu'entre 1993 et 2008 à peu près, le ratio de ce que consomment les jeunes Américains était passé de 1 pour 2 à peu près 8 à 10 pour 1. C'est-à-dire le THC a été, par les trafiquants, extrêmement augmenté par rapport au cannabidiol. Je voulais avoir votre sentiment sur cette question et vous demander que dans une dimension un peu de science qui n'en est pas, vous demandez si la prévalence, a priori, des pathologies psychiatriques liées au cannabis n'augmenterait pas par rapport à ce cannabis où on voit le ratio modifié augmenter. Voilà.
Absolutely. That is, cannabidiol is an antipsychotic. So it would not be surprising that if you markedly reduce the amount of cannabidiol, that the THC by itself or with very little cannabidiol will increase the likelihood of psychosis.
Très bien. Il est possible de prendre quelques questions avant de... Oui? Moi, j'arrive pas à voir. Quelques questions au niveau de la salle avant l'intervention du professeur Bout pour qu'on puisse ensuite débattre puisque nous avons quand même... Oui? Est-ce qu'on peut donner le micro à M. Herskovitz?
Précision d'abord sur le Sativex. La modification qu'il y a eu, et tu le sais Amine, c'est qu'auparavant, aucune médication contenant du THC n'était autorisée en France. Donc on avait juste un produit qui était le marinol, de peu d'effets, pour lequel il fallait demander une autorisation particulière, et d'ailleurs il y avait très peu de demandes. Ce qui a été modifié, c'est que maintenant, cette interdiction totale d'utiliser le THC dans n'importe quel médicament a été levée. Et donc maintenant s'engage un processus plus normal, si je puis dire, d'autorisation et de discussion autour du Sativex, qui, je le rappelle, est autorisé dans plusieurs pays d'Europe, dans les indications qui ont été rappelées tout à l'heure, mais dont moi-même, on a eu des discussions à plusieurs reprises avec le laboratoire. On aboutissait à un cul-de-sac, puisque par définition, il ne pouvait pas y avoir cela en France. Donc maintenant, la discussion s'ouvre sous des auspices différents. Voilà.
Très bien. Merci. Est-ce qu'il... Oui, Laurent?
Je crois que le micro ne marche pas. Si, il marche. Ok. Une question, vous en avez un tout petit peu parlé, Herb, merci beaucoup. C'est surtout l'interaction des cannabinoïdes avec les autres, pas simplement le drogue illicite, hein, vous avez parlé des interactions avec le système endomorphinique chez le rat, mais je voulais savoir ce que ça fait, par exemple, chez les gens qui ont le VIH, puisque c'est indiqué dans les cachexes du VIH, est-ce qu'il y a des interactions avec les autres médicaments du VIH? Est-ce qu'il y a des interactions avec des psychotropes connus? Par exemple, vous avez parlé d'un jeune psychotique fumeur. Est-ce que les thérapeutiques traditionnelles, antipsychotiques, fonctionnent pareil avec et sans cannabis? Y a-t-il de la documentation là-dessus? Merci par avance.
I'm not aware of any interactions. Perhaps Dr. O'Brien or Dr. Booth would know of any.
I don't think the problem is interactions with other medications, at least that have been clearly demonstrated, but there is a problem of placebo-controlled trials that demonstrate efficacy. And I was a member of a committee in California where the state appropriated funds for research to prove whether or not marijuana really was effective as a medication for things like wasting disease of HIV. And no satisfactory study, to my knowledge, has ever been done because no one wanted to volunteer for a study where they might get a placebo. And if you don't have a placebo group, then you don't really have a study. And of course, it's questionable whether it's ethical or not. But right now, people have so much hope, and there's so many placebo effects. But the literature, if you look at it very carefully, it's not clear that marijuana has some of the effects, like the one of treating the cachexia of chronic illness like AIDS.
Merci. Je voudrais revenir sur ce qui a été dit tout à l'heure, Monsieur KLEBER. Vous avez montré à juste titre la méta-analyse de Teresa Moore et Stanley Zamit de Bristol, qui a été publiée en 2007 dans le Lancet, où dans les conclusions, ils disent clairement que le lien entre schizophrénie et cannabis est un lien qui n'était pas simple. Il fallait de gros consommateurs. Ils disent aussi qu'il faut avoir commencé tôt, la précocité, vous l'avez bien montré. Et ils disent aussi qu'il faut d'autres facteurs, notamment des antécédents familiaux, personnels, de psychose ou bien de pathologie psychotique, d'autres facteurs. Or, je voulais avoir votre sentiment parce que quand on parle de THC, de cannabidiol THC, on a l'impression qu'on a un double raisonnement. D'abord, on pense que la schizophrénie, si on prend du THC, la prévalence va augmenter alors qu'elle n'a pas augmenté, même si on a modifié le ratio entre THC et cannabidiol. Et on oublie souvent ce qui a été d'ailleurs dit tout à l'heure, tous les aspects environnementaux, c'est-à-dire évidemment la génétique, la famille, les antécédents, la précocité. Est-ce que vous ne pensez pas que ce sont des facteurs qui comptent autant que la nature et la consommation de cannabis dans l'émergence de la maladie, puisque la prévalence n'a pas bougé de la schizophrénie?
Well, as I read the literature, I think it's clear. Remember that meta-analysis that you're referring to is 2007, 6 years ago. And as I read these literature on psychosis, you have an increased risk of a psychotic reaction, even when there is no family history. And I think the most recent was some work done by Robin Moore in England. So I believe that, yes, you can produce a psychotic state even without a family history, especially if you start young.
Okay, ça c'est très important de préciser, c'est-à-dire que ce n'est pas simplement un phénomène de précipitation, mais pour avoir une pathologie psychotique de nouveau. En gros, c'est un peu ça, par un phénomène lié au seul produit. Est-ce qu'il y a... Oui, il y a un bras qui se lève.
Oui, bonjour. Voilà, je voulais savoir pourquoi 4 fois plus de goudron par rapport au tabac joint. Et puis une deuxième question. Donc les patients qu'on est amenés à suivre disent que les usagers de cannabis anglo-saxons et américains ne font des joints qu'avec du cannabis et pas du tabac. Donc je voulais savoir s'il y avait des choses différentes par rapport aux pratiques. Voilà, un petit peu.
You see both. That is, in terms of why 4-to-1, I think that is due to a number of factors. One is the way you inhale. Marijuana users go, and then they hold the smoke in. We see that in our laboratory where we watch their intake of marijuana and we measure how much they're taking in. Second, often it is wrapped, as I said, it can be wrapped with tobacco leaf, but I think it may have to do more with how they smoke it, whereas the average cigarette smoker, they don't hold it in like the marijuana smoker does.
Peut-être qu'on va demander au professeur Boot de présenter sa communication pour pouvoir ensuite poursuivre. Oui. Ok.
Pas le droit de poser une dernière question.
Je vois pas. Okay.
Il y avait une dernière question. Ici, là.
Allez-y, je vois pas. Hop.
Je dis qu'à défaut d'une analyse sémiologique assez précise du discours du sujet, il y aura toujours une confusion entre ce qu'on pourra repérer comme un état psychotique réactionnel à la prise de produit et affirmer qu'on provoque une structure psychotique. La différence sémiologique permet justement de faire le distinguo entre tout ce qui est réactionnel et qui n'a absolument pas le même contenu clinique qu'une psychose structurelle, et qu'à défaut de ce type de travail, il y aura toujours cette confusion qui tendra à penser que le produit doit être incriminé comme la cause de la structure psychotique. C'est un petit commentaire. Notre expérience dans notre structure à Paris démontre que les consommateurs de hashish ou jeunes, à des doses très importantes et souvent solitaires, sont plutôt des révélateurs qu'autre chose. Et que ça veut dire que c'est le moment d'intervenir avec le jeune et la famille pour justement intercepter ce qui ensuite, évidemment, va programmer, je dirais, l'ensemble de la problématique psychotique. Voilà.
I would like to thank Jean-Pierre and the organizers of this conference for inviting me to your lovely city. I'm excited about this presentation as I was about Dr. KLEBER's. So the title of my presentation is Medical Marijuana in Colorado, Voices from the Field. It is supported by the National Institute on Drug Abuse before they closed down, frankly. I'm going to be presenting data from 3 different sources today. One is epidemiological, the second is from qualitative data using focus groups and semi-structured interviews, and then the third is survey data, which is currently underway at this point. Yes, okay. I have no conflicts of interest. I do have a tendency to speak fast, which I will try to contain to the best of my ability. Let me outline some of the key events leading to where we are today, and you might be aware that in the most recent election, the Colorado voters approved marijuana for recreational use. It will take effect in January of 2014. However, going back, in the year 2000, the Colorado voters approved the legal use of marijuana for medical purposes. In order to obtain a registry card, patients must be diagnosed with a debilitating condition in the context of, quote, a bona fide relationship with a physician. The conditions that are considered debilitating include cancer, glaucoma, HIV or AIDS, cachexia, severe pain, severe nausea, seizures, muscle spasms, and, quote, as Dr. KLEBER pointed out, any other condition approved by the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, or CDPHE. Patients and recommending physicians complete an application. The cost of those applications varies between $60 and $100. If an application is not denied within 35 days, then it is considered approved. And that's a pivotal point because, as I will show shortly, it got to the extent where so many applications were coming into the health department that they could not possibly be processed within 35 days. In 2009, there were only 495 applications, so it's kind of curious that it had been approved for 9 years and yet nothing was happening up until later on. The reason for that primarily is that the health department limited the number of patients per caregiver to 6. And so that was impossible given the number of caregivers to support very many patients. However, in January, the health department said that that's an absurd regulation, that they can have unlimited number of patients. And so that opened the floodgates. In February, a second reason is that the Obama administration declared that federal resources will not be used to circumvent state laws concerning medical marijuana. I should also point out when the bill before the Colorado voters to legalize the recreational use of marijuana was being heard, that the Obama administration also did not come out against the use of marijuana in Colorado, in part because Colorado was a swing state in the election, meaning it could go either Republican or Democrat. And they knew that the polls were showing that in all likelihood the voters would approve the legalization of marijuana, so it would behoove the president not to come out against marijuana. And in fact, more people in Colorado during the last presidential election voted to legalize marijuana than voted for Obama, although Obama fortunately was elected. In October, the number of applications increased from 495 in January to 4,051 per month, and CDPHE could no longer process them within 35 days. By December, there were 10,585 applications per month, and an explosion in the number of medical marijuana centers, or MMC. And in 2013, in November, Colorado voters approved an amendment number 64 to legalize recreational use of marijuana. And as I said, that will take place in January. What are some of the regulations that are pertinent? Patients, they need a physician recommendation and to complete an application. They must agree to either grow their own, and people can grow up to 6 plants currently, designate a caregiver to grow for them, or designate a medical marijuana center to be where they would receive their product. They may possess up to 2 ounces or more if it's considered medically necessary, and they must renew their license each year. Physicians need to have an unrestricted medical license. They need to have current Drug Enforcement Administration, or DEA, registration. They may not have a conflict with a medical marijuana center. In other words, they can't be a part owner of a medical marijuana center. And they must have, quote, a bona fide relationship with the patient. Medical marijuana regulations further. Medical marijuana centers, they may sell marijuana to registered patients only. They must grow at least 70% of their own marijuana through what is known as an optional premises cultivation license. There also are medical marijuana infused product manufacturers. They may produce edibles, tinctures, or beverages for wholesale to MMCs. They cannot call their product food, as it would need to be regulated by the Food and Drug Administration. And they cannot cultivate their own medical marijuana. So there's a distinction between those who can sell edibles or tinctures and those who can grow marijuana. Turning to first the epidemiology data in Colorado. These are from the National Survey on Drug Use and Health. And let me kind of walk you through what this depicts. The blue bar on the left is the period from 2004 to 6. Excuse me, the purple bar. The blue is between 2006 and 2008, and the red, the more recent period between 2008 and 10. And as I show you these data and other data during the course of this presentation, please recall that in 2009 was the real pivotal year in terms of marijuana use in Colorado. Nevertheless, we find that marijuana use in Denver has increased fairly sharply going back to 2004, as has marijuana use in, excuse me, why am I pointing at this? As has marijuana use in Colorado. Whereas marijuana use, this is in the past month, has increased only slightly in the nation as a whole. And you'll also notice, secondly, that in Denver, 12.2% reported using marijuana in the past 30 days, nearly twice that in the US as a whole. Looking now at the perception of great risk of smoking marijuana once a month, in other words, do the people who were interviewed about marijuana use feel that there's a great risk in smoking marijuana? We find that the perception of great risk in Denver has declined over these 3 time periods from over 30% to 22%. It also has declined in Colorado as a whole, although not as steeply. And there's been very little decline in the US as a whole. So Colorado in general smokes more than the nation, and they perceive that there's less risk, which makes sense, to smoking marijuana. Looking at grade school to high school kids in Colorado, we see that beginning in the 6th grade up to the 12th grade, those reporting marijuana use, again, this is in the last 30 days, has increased from 4% in the 6th grade to 32%, that's in Denver, at 12th grade. And we also see an increase in Colorado up to 31%. There's only a slight increase in the nation as a whole. Drug and school-related suspensions, they were fairly even. These are suspensions for drug-related offenses. I should say that 97% of the drug-related suspensions or expulsions in Colorado are due to THC, or marijuana. They were fairly flat up until the period of 2008 and 2009, and then we see they escalated to a little less than 5,000 in 2009 and 10. The most current data show that there's close to 5,000 expulsions during the most recent reporting year. So these are annual figures, not cumulative figures. Looking at drug abuse warning network, these are people who show up voluntarily to emergency rooms in the Denver metro area and whether they test positive for drugs or not. And these are fairly, I think, honest, accurate, valid data because people are in an emergency room and they want help and they need to tell the doctor, the attending physician, what they're there for. And we see the most common reason for emergency room admission, is marijuana at whoa, I did it again, at 33%, with cocaine second at about 30%. Well, who are the physicians that are prescribing these drugs? As Herb pointed out, there's a relative minor number of physicians prescribing a lot of marijuana to patients. Overall, in Colorado, beginning in the December of 2009, there were around 1,154 physicians. That has decreased to the point that the most current period, which is just last December of 2012, there were 894 physicians prescribing marijuana. Looking at those who have more than 1,000 patients, it peaked in in mid-2011 where there were 45 physicians. Currently, there's about 33 physicians who have more than 1,000 patients. The bulk of physicians, however, have between 1 and 2 patients. Looking at the registered number of marijuana users, as you can see, there's been a fairly steep increase going back to December of 2009. Currently, the most recent reporting period, this is in July of this year, 2013, there's more than 250,000 Colorado residents that have a medical marijuana license. The number of applications, these are annual figures. The most recent data show that there's about 110,000 people pending approval to get a medical marijuana license. What are the conditions for which there are, this is the age breakdown. You see that the biggest age group are those 26 to 35 years of age, where back in the original, in 2009, they were about 29%. As a percent of the total, they have declined slightly to 26%, whereas those who are 56 years of age and older has steadily increased from less than 15% to currently about 21%. So there tends to be an aging of the number of people who are requesting a license for marijuana. Looking at debilitating conditions, and I listed early on the conditions for which people can get a medical marijuana license, by far severe pain, 92, 94, 94, 94, 94%. You could have more than one condition. That's why these figures total more than 100%. But if you look at pain, 94%. The second is muscle spasms at about 14%. And severe nausea at 10%. So clearly severe pain, as Herb pointed out earlier, is the most common reason for getting a medical marijuana license. Looking at driving under the influence of drugs, I think two things stand out here. One is, and these figures are from 2009, 2010, 2011, and 2012. One is that THC accounts for more occurrences of driving under the influence of drugs than all other drugs combined. Secondly, it's rising rapidly from less than 800 in the 2009 period to nearly 2,100 in the most recent period that we have data for. Looking at cannabis-related motor vehicle fatalities, by total fatalities, I think a couple things stand out here as well. One is that these are cannabis-related crashes, and here are fatalities among cannabis-related crashes. Both are increasing, going back to 2008, from 30, 37 to 52 most recently in terms of fatalities, where THC was positive in those victims. It's gone from 36 down to 59. And interestingly enough, if you look at overall motor vehicle fatalities in Colorado, they have declined during these periods from 548 to 447. And so consequently, the percentage of fatalities that have THC in the database have doubled from 6.6 to over 13%. These are some ads that appear in the local free press. Point out a few things. Here's $20 for an eighth of an ounce, $130 for an ounce for non-members. Here's a little bargain here. You can get it for $10 for an eighth of an ounce. Weed deals, love our Facebook page. Kind pain management. $149 offer expires in May of 2013. All top shelf grams for $20. Come shop with us, your center does. 2-for-1 blunts, top shelf shake, not sweet leaf. Here we have clearly a nurse, a registered nurse, advertising $60 doctor exams. $125 for ounces, hydro ounces, and you can get top shelf ounces for $140. And I live in Boulder, Colorado, and every year they have their Best of Boulder series. So it could be the best sushi restaurant, the best optician, the best place to get shoes, etc. And so obviously they have the best place to buy marijuana. And for the 4th year in a row, it was the Dandelion, locally owned and grown. Thank you, Boulder, for voting the Dandelion Best of Boulder 4 years in a row. Turn now to qualitative findings. We conducted semi-structured interviews with 35 people. They included physicians, both those in favor of marijuana and those opposed, medical marijuana owners, growers, people from law enforcement, attorneys, and 1 member of the Colorado legislature. We also had 4 focus groups with medical marijuana patients, totaling 32 individuals. So I'm going to read you some quotes from the transcripts for these focus groups and semi-structured interviews was over 300 pages. So I tried to pare it down. Prescribing physicians. Somebody can take it during the day and be completely focused and not stoned and be therapeutic, and they'll be anti-seizure, anti-pain, anti-whatever they want to be. When asked about the benefits of marijuana, another doctor said, "That's a hard question to answer. I mean, they're using it, so my sense is that they feel like they're getting a benefit. I know a couple of patients that have been very open with me and say it helps them. So you try to assess if they're getting any relief with the therapies they're trying. But whether that's from medical marijuana or from other medications they're using, or physical therapy or counseling, I don't know." These are from non-prescribing anti-medical marijuana physicians. Honestly, when people tell me they're a medical marijuana, they're telling me they just want to get high. That's basically what I hear. I think it's a mockery of responsible medicine, and it's embarrassing to the profession of medicine. Another one said, "I don't think there's a great science to support it, although too, I suppose I have a concern that it's probably not necessarily worse than some of the other stuff we prescribe, although that's not an endorsement. I'm sure it makes people feel better. I don't question that a moment. But I think it has clearly addictive properties. It doesn't necessarily constitute a good long-term solution to what are usually long-term problems that people are taking it for." And a third said, "They're not meditating, they're not doing yoga, they're not getting exercise, and they're not necessarily following a good diet. They're still eating junk food and sitting and being very sedentary and watching television and smoking cigarettes. I don't think they think for a moment they're being healthy by using medical marijuana, but they really exhibit a lot of other behaviors that are what we would call considerable, and they don't really exhibit a lot of behaviors that we would consider healthy." From the patient's viewpoint, I have lupus. They give me a medication that they give people for malaria, which really upsets my stomach. I feel nauseous all day. I take it twice, but medical marijuana makes it so I can eat, which I have to do with that medication, and it makes the nausea not so bad. I have social anxiety. It really helps with that. I have my card for post-op pain in my shoulder. I really just use that as an excuse to get it, because anxiety is not a legitimate debilitating condition. Anxiety is unacceptable as a reason. It really helps me function in social settings. It helps me be myself, to be more confident. I have such high anxiety that it will actually manifest into physical pain. So I get a lot of muscle pains as well as mental stress and anxiety from the whole situation. One hit of cannabis and you're exhaling all of those worries away. It's incredible, it really is. When my wife came down with ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, I was buying it on the street because it would do two things for her. One, most important, it helped her sleep. Two, it lightened her mood. It enabled her to shift her focus and just relax more. However, at the time, I didn't know squat about cannabis. Neither did she. We just knew that marijuana is marijuana, like 90% of the people out there. And so sometimes I would get something and bring it home, and I didn't really know what I was getting. It was just marijuana. And she would turn into what I call the chatty Cathy. And now I know that was sativa. And so she'd be up and active and wanting to do things and engage. Other times it would be just to put her to sleep. She'd get what we call the couch look, and that would be indica. Pain management. I know we've got a former soldier who was taking like 30 oxycodone a week to control the pain, and now has gotten down to where he's doing maybe 3 a week or something like that. I can't really remember the exact number, but all kinds of stories like that. And if you talk to any other center, they'll have stories like that, as well as the people who've been able to get off the opiate-based drugs by using cannabis. At the same time, it really changed our lives because it allowed my husband to go from 180 milligrams of oxycodone a day to none 2 years later. We were at a point in our life where I hated him. He was always sick and so much narcotic that he was not the person who I married at all. So I watched this evolution in my life and became very passionate about medical marijuana. My dealings with cannabis was pretty limited to a minimal recreational use. But in 2005, no medicine worked for my bipolar and my back was bothering me. So I went to the doctor and they gave me opiates. I had an allergic reaction to opiates and my mood got worse. So with that in mind, I started using medical cannabis to help. I used it for my pain and it also helped my bipolar like none of the other medicines that I had. And I have tried everything. Dispensary owners on this same topic. Yeah, I think it helps with paranoia, anxiety, depression. We do monitor all of our patients for those things anyway, but there are also people who use medical marijuana, really, to self-medicate psychiatric disease. I think for some people, in addition to maybe depression and anxiety, is PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, which is a huge problem in our patient population. Many of our patients have PTSD, and I think several of them use marijuana as a calming agent. A dispensary owner regarding the types of marijuana to recommend. And these dispensary owners honestly tend to act like physicians, even though they're not. They think they ask the patient coming in what their symptoms are, what their problems are, and then they make a recommendation. The big thing I want to know is, why are they here? What do they have? Is it cancer? Is it just normal pain? Is it an accident? One guy came in with a battery in his hip and wires going up and down his spine. He had a car accident. I don't know what kind of pain he deals with, so I recommended edibles. The tough part there is when someone has never eaten edibles before, it's a different experience. Sometimes it takes an hour or two before it kicks in. That's the hard part for people to understand, because smoking is immediate. Less than 5 minutes to get to your full peak. And so for cancer patients dealing with nausea, smoking is a little bit better. But edibles can help you better because they're longer lasting. So maybe you smoke right away when you take the edible to affect you until the edible kicks in. And then you can go through the rest of your day. These are medical marijuana patients on different varieties of marijuana. Male 1, I found indicas taste better than sativas, are stronger. What they did is they had sativa-based swag, which is ditchweed, and they mixed it with indica because people wanted better taste and better flavor, better smell, and all that. That's when the indica started mixing with sativa. A true sativa is just unreal. A real true sativa will make your ears buzz like a bee's in there. You'll be so alert. A true sativa will make you paranoid. It can almost be a little too speedy. Yeah, it'll make your heart pump. It'll make you nervous. I got 140 pulse from sativa. We're sitting at this grill and I took my pulse, it was 140, but yet I was not speeding, I was calm. That's the thing about cannabis, it can make you feel alert. I found this one called Black Russian, and it's totally, I mean, the names of these marijuana products are really creative, believe me. I found this one called Black Russian, and it's totally black and it's like getting a hug. It was like the old man could have smoked that, helping with the pain. I haven't been able to find it since. Hawaiian is like that to me, soft stone. I ate a cupcake before work one time and I could barely stand up. So that's not too good. A dispensary owner about edibles. This gentleman came in and bought 2 edibles from me. He ate half of the bankroll, waited 45 minutes, and then ate the other half. Right there, that's 100 milligrams. 2.5 hours later, he comes back and said he wasn't feeling anything. So he bought a bag of my gummies. Each one is 25 milligrams. He ate 2 gummies over another hour, went to dinner. Everything was fine at dinner, but at the end, he started to feel it. Plus, he had a glass of wine. They went to the Pepsi Center for a hockey game. He said he spent 2 periods in the bathroom freaking out. He couldn't sit with his girlfriend and her friend, freaking out in the bathroom, like wanting to leave, but didn't want to leave because he didn't want to ruin their night at the hockey game. He couldn't be around the public and like, oh my God, dude, that's what I was trying to tell you. Sometimes you just have to take it and let it kick in. But everybody's body's a little bit different. And from a consumer, particularly with edibles, people can have what they call the oh my God experience because you simply cannot uneat. It sneaks up on you. People sometimes eat too much. I mean, it's happened to everybody. I had an edible. I thought I had a smaller amount, but I woke up and my eyes were wide open. They were fully dilated. I had a hard time seeing. I actually had to crawl to the bathroom, but you know what? It wore off after about an hour. So it was fine. I just had to lie in bed and wait for it to pass. And finally, these are some focus group members talking about driving. Do what? Slow down? Okay. Okay. Medical. There was a study that was just released about that. This is about driving while on marijuana. A guy did a test and found that actually individuals who consume marijuana medically on the medical level, because they have to keep it there at this point, are safer than drivers who do not use marijuana. Yeah, that's a fact. That's a fact, a proven fact. Yeah, I know a study in Car and Driver that said that. I really don't think any of this is true, by the way. You're trying to convince the insurance agency to put marijuana users on their policies because they're bound not to have accidents. When I get the right dose of the highest quality meds, I'm the last guy you want on the road. I know these people that drive after they smoke it, but I've had no problem doing it. The thing is, when people get high and they get so high they can't drive, they know they shouldn't be driving. It does not remove judgment. I smoke a lot and I like to eat lollipops and hard candies. These are marijuana infused candies. I smoke during the day because I do a lot of driving, and I hate driving in the city. I'm pretty sure you guys are well aware that happens in Denver, what happens in Denver. It's terrible. Smoking just helps me take deep breaths and not get road rage. So I usually smoke sativas during the day, and then at night I smoke indicas because that will help my shoulder and help me go to sleep. These are some photos of medical marijuana dispensaries in the Denver area. Not too far actually from my office. Medical marijuana licensing and counseling. They do counseling. Kush, best Kush in Denver. Well docs with a medical symbol. This is right down from my office. This is a medical marijuana center clinic, the Alternative Medicine Clinic, or Health Depot. I'll show you some pictures of the products shortly inside this medical marijuana center. It's on Brighton Boulevard, which is in Commerce City. Medical marijuana products. You can get also Pink Kush, Grape Ape, Bubba Kush, $35 an ounce, or $35 for a quarter of an ounce. Mountain High Suckers, CBD-rich infused edibles. Dewdrops, organic hash, half a gram, full melt for 20 bucks, bubble for 15. Tincture, cannabis-infused scented lotions. You can get lotions and soaps that are infused with marijuana. Was $16. There's a bargain currently going on for 8 bucks. These are teas. You can get sweet tea, lemonade, or old-fashioned sarsaparilla. It's infused with marijuana. This is the grow area for this medical marijuana center. And they use various grow lights to facilitate the growth. And this is the owner of this medical marijuana center, which is one on Brighton Boulevard. And she was quite willing to allow us to take pictures of her products. And I also should say that the security in this building, as well as in all the medical marijuana centers that we're familiar with, is overwhelming. I mean, so that people cannot break in and take their products. This was a fellow that was outside of one of the medical marijuana centers not too long ago advertising free joints. And this is actually one of our subjects in this study. He was trying to start a collective where people would join a club and they could go there to smoke marijuana. The legislature later outlawed this. And what he was doing here, he had a mobile van, and he was driving around Denver with a bong and offering free hits to people in order to get them to sign up for his collective. And then the final data set I'm going to be showing you is survey data. In this particular study, we're surveying medical marijuana patients as well as illicit marijuana users. The sample includes 81 medical marijuana patients and 127 non-legal users of marijuana. This is a longitudinal study. We're going to be interviewing people over the course of 18 months. Because we're just in the early phases of the survey portion, I only have baseline data. In terms of some of the demographics, they're very similar. About 60% are male, 40% female. The average age is quite similar. The average around 42, 43 years of age. The age at first use, 15 versus about 14. And I should say that among the medical marijuana cohort, there was only one person that did not smoke marijuana prior to medical marijuana being legalized, only one. So these are not naive people coming into the marijuana industry. Smoking marijuana is their route of administration. There's their primary, not too much difference, although, you know, I'm even surprised that there are any illicit marijuana users who are eating it, but maybe they're making cookies. The number of times used per day, medical marijuana patients average 5.5 times a day that they're using it, compared to about 1 less a day, 4.5, for those who are illicit users. To walk you through this, the registered users are depicted in the blue bars and the illicit users in the red. Here we're looking at self-reported marijuana use. We also do urinalysis on all of our subjects. That's part of the eligibility requirements. They have to test positive for THC. And so we're comparing, in a way, registered versus non-registered, but also self-report versus urinalysis. And looking at self-report, it's interesting that 6% of the medical marijuana users self-reported using cocaine, 4% methamphetamine, and a few sedatives. Much higher, as you would expect, among the illicit users. 28% use cocaine in addition to marijuana. Looking over here at the urinalysis results, we find that similar findings. Actually, one of the things I wanted to comment on is, you know, a lot of people criticize self-report data because it's not accurate. But if you look at the comparison between self-report and urinalysis, they almost mirror one another. For example, using cocaine among illicit users, 28, testing positive, 25, heroin, 15% versus 18%. Methamphetamine 14 versus 15. So the urinalysis results really practically mirror, and you would expect some differences because of the half-life of the drug. And as far as using heroin versus in 0 here and yet 13% tested positive for opiates, those would clearly be prescription opiates. Marijuana as an aid to quit other drug use, similar to what we found in the qualitative portion of this study. Did they use marijuana to reduce illicit drug use? 31% of registered users said yes, 44% of illicit users said yes. And perhaps most interesting is, did they use marijuana to reduce the use of prescription drugs, primarily opiates? 60%, 3 out of 5 of the registered marijuana users said they were using it to reduce the use of prescription drugs versus a little over 1/4 of those who were illicit users. Reasons for marijuana use, as you might expect, illicit users were far more likely to use it for recreational purposes as opposed to medical users who were far more likely to use it for medical purposes. But it's interesting that 44% of the medical users also used it for recreation, as did a little over 1/3 of illicit users. Now turning to what the various reasons were for their medical use, we have the highest reported use, just like we had with the Colorado survey data, for severe pain. Nearly 90% of those who were medical marijuana patients reported using it for pain, but the highest percentage among illicit users was also for severe pain. And these conditions, anxiety and depression, were fairly high in terms of their proportion of users reporting that's why they took marijuana. And yet neither one of these conditions are approved by the Colorado Department of Health as a debilitating medical condition. So 49%, nearly 50% of medical marijuana patients were taking it for anxiety, and about 29% for depression. Neither condition is approved, and as that one quote from that individual said, I told people that I had severe pain in order that I could get marijuana because anxiety isn't a legitimate reason. Looking at other behavior, have they ever driven a car while high on marijuana? Registered users, 85% said yes. 71% of illicit users said yes. Excuse me. Have they driven a car within 3 hours of use? 68% of medical marijuana patients versus 45%. And have they had sex while high on marijuana? Over 90% of both groups said yes. When asked, this is obviously only medical marijuana users, have you ever shared your medical marijuana? 81% said yes. Have you ever sold your medical marijuana? Nearly 1/4 had sold their medical marijuana. In summary, beginning in 2009, the number of applications for medical marijuana and the number of registered patients began to rise exponentially, reaching more than 250,000 by July of this year. In terms of the epidemiology data from 2004 to 2010, past month marijuana use increased steadily. Colorado, especially the Denver metro area, far exceeded the US. In 2008 to 10, Denver had twice the nation's percent of users. In 2011 and 12, past month marijuana use among high school students increased continuously from the 6th through the 12th grade, reaching 32% by the 12th grade. More so, actually much more so in Denver and Colorado than the US. Beginning in 2009, drug-related school suspensions and expulsions increased sharply. From 2009 to 2012, blood tests for driving under the influence of THC far exceeded any other drug, reaching an all-time high in 2012. From 2008 to 2011, cannabis-related motor vehicle fatalities progressively increased, while total vehicle fatalities decreased. From our qualitative data, most physicians interviewed were opposed to medical marijuana, but some felt it was beneficial. Medical marijuana patients, on the other hand, felt strongly that it helped with a variety of conditions, including nausea, anxiety, bipolar disorder, PTSD, loss of appetite, sleep deprivation, pain management, and to get off prescription drugs. And from our survey, medical users were more likely to have used marijuana to reduce prescription opiates, 60 versus 27%, while illicit users were far more likely to report using marijuana to reduce the use of other illicit drugs, 44 versus 31%. 56% of medical marijuana reported using it because of anxiety, as did 41% for depression. Neither condition is an accepted debilitating condition, according to CDPHE. 85% of medical marijuana users reported driving while high on marijuana in their lifetime, as did 71% of illicit users. 68 and 45% respectively drove within 3 hours of using marijuana in the past year. 91 and 95% of medical and illicit users respectively reporting having sex while high on marijuana. Among registered medical marijuana users, 81% had shared marijuana with others and 23% had sold marijuana to others. Limitations, well, the epidemiology data reported here reflect trends, not cause and effect. The qualitative data was based solely on opinion, and the sample could have been biased. For example, we did not interview former medical marijuana patients, those who had medical marijuana but dropped their use of medical marijuana. We only interviewed those who currently had a license, and so clearly there was a bias there. In terms of the survey data, social desirability could be a factor, wanting to please the interviewer, yet self-reported data, drug use, and UAs were highly consistent. Recall, it could be recall error, although most of the variables ask about ever done this or did you do this in the last 30 days. So recall should not have been a significant issue. And finally, a portion of the illicit marijuana users were former, the name of my project is Project Safe, and some of them, when we first started recruiting people, were former Project Safe clients. You know, they know who we are, they trust us, and they came in and they were marijuana users, but they also were using other illicit drugs. We've since changed the eligibility requirements that if they were ever in Project Safe, they're not eligible. So because of that, some of the data I presented about other drug use among the illicit users may be biased because they were former clients. Conclusions. Epidemiological data show increasing adverse trends regarding the use of marijuana beginning in 2009, coinciding with a rapid rise in medical marijuana applications and registered patients. Qualitative and quantitative findings indicated that many marijuana users felt it helped them with a variety of debilitating conditions, not all of which were approved for registration. Both medical marijuana patients and illicit users reported that marijuana helped them reduce the use of other drugs, particularly prescription opiates. And finally, driving a car while high on marijuana, having sex while high, as well as sharing marijuana were so common they could be considered normative behavior. Thank you. This is one final thing. I forgot about this. When they passed the legislation approving the legal use of recreational marijuana beginning next year, the legislature had to hammer out what the rules could be. And the session's now over. They're all excited because they've approved the final regulations, and these are a couple of members of the Senate celebrating the fact that they finally approved what the legislation is going to entail. Thank you. My co-authors.
Donc la conclusion, vous le disiez tout à l'heure, c'est que dans le Colorado, le fait d'avoir permis en quelque sorte l'expérimentation, c'est plus l'expérimentation parce que la loi est passée, le cannabis thérapeutique a fait exploser en gros la consommation du cannabis, notamment à but festif ou à but récréatif, plutôt récréatif. Alors moi, une question pratique, est-ce que toutes les personnes qui se sont inscrites pour recevoir ce marijuana doivent habiter le Colorado? Première question.
Yes.
D'accord. Donc, quand on habite à notre État, on ne peut pas avoir du cannabis chez vous?
No, not legally.
Ok. Donc ça c'est déjà une.
Could I make a comment though about the new legislation? With the new legislation that will take effect in 2014. First off, for the first year and a half, only current medical marijuana centers can sell marijuana. New people can't start a business. It's not prohibited. It's prohibited. Secondly, if you're a medical marijuana patient right now, you can buy 2 ounces of marijuana. If you're a recreational marijuana user, you can buy 1 ounce. And if you're from out of state, you can buy a ½ ounce in 2014. Medical marijuana patients do not have to pay tax. There's no tax on their prescription. recreational users have to pay a tax, and the tax is 25%. So we're curious as to what will happen with the current medical marijuana patients. It's cheaper, and they can buy more if they renew their license, which probably will happen.
Yes.
Quick question. How did so many kids get expelled from school for marijuana when it was legal?
Why am I putting this on? It's not legal if you're under 18 years of age. It's illegal. Now, you can, with special disposition with a physician, get medical marijuana if you're under 18. But currently, there's only 12 kids in Colorado that are getting medical marijuana who are under 18. So this is a population where it's illegal to get marijuana.
Alors, juste une question, peut-être une interrogation pour nous. On voit bien dans ce que vous avez présenté que c'est finalement le système mis en place qui a été débordé, qui a été pris finalement, qui a été débordé par la demande qui a explosé. Ce n'est pas la marijuana médicale ou médicamenteuse, ce n'est pas le cannabis thérapeutique qui est en cause, mais c'est l'organisation du système qui a été, me semble-t-il, un peu débordé. Est-ce que c'est ce que vous pensez ou c'est le sentiment qu'on a quand on voit ça? Un peu de la même manière qu'à un moment donné aux États-Unis, il y a eu un débordement des cliniques de la douleur où on prescrivait des opiacés. Est-ce qu'on peut dire que c'est pareil?
Yeah, I think the Colorado Public Health Department was totally unprepared for this. They had no idea that when they loosened the number of patients that each caregiver could provide, and when the Obama administration came out and said they're no longer going to they won't prosecute, they were totally unprepared for what was going to happen. And they just can't turn around and start hiring a bunch of people. You need legislative approval to hire people, and it's a lengthy process. They were overwhelmed, and they still are.
Très bien, je pense que c'est important de préciser que c'est d'un niveau différent. On va devoir s'arrêter. Je vous remercie beaucoup, professeur KLEBER et professeur Booth, parce que ce sujet est très polémique chez nous. C'est très bien d'avoir un certain nombre d'experts comme vous, de renommée mondiale, qui viennent apaiser le débat et qui nous amènent des éléments qui ont été cités tout à l'heure, des éléments évidemment validés et sur lesquels on peut continuer à débattre. J'invite pour ceux qui sont intéressés de poursuivre la réflexion et le débat sur le cannabis, qu'un atelier est prévu à ce sujet, dans lequel nous allons avoir des orateurs qui vont nous faire le point sur les études récentes, les revues de littérature, et dans lequel on peut revenir également sur ces aspects. On a privilégié l'information plutôt que le débat, mais dans le débat n'est qu'à venir. Donc, oui. Prenez le micro. Vas-y. Redites-le avec le micro. Redites-le avec le micro. Allez-y.
Excusez-moi, mais
bien sûr, allez-y.
J'entends bien effectivement que le temps nous manque et qu'il fallait privilégier l'information, mais cette information me semble tout au moins contestable, c'est le minimum, et je reprendrai beaucoup de ces éléments dans l'atelier que nous animerons avec Assud sur le cannabis thérapeutique vendredi après-midi, avec des arguments, avec des études, avec vraiment les pièces, et pas comme on a vu ici avec beaucoup d'approximations à mon sens. Merci beaucoup, et je vous attends tous.
C'est le but de ces rencontres de toutes les façons, c'est un débat qui se poursuit sur les 4 jours.
La conclusion est faite simplement pour rappeler que là a été abordé tout le problème de la demande de marijuana et que le problème de l'impact de la répression sur le trafic n'a pas été envisagé. Nous avons bien l'intention d'organiser un débat sur l'impact des drug policies, des politiques des drogues dans les pays occidentaux, principalement l'Amérique du Nord et l'Europe ensuite, dont la consommation, la demande très importante, quelles que soient les drogues, l'état légal de la situation, puisqu'en France, la consommation de cannabis est extrêmement pénalisée, dans le Colorado elle est légalisée. Quoi qu'il en soit, la consommation de cannabis par l'Amérique et l'Europe est tellement forte qu'elle a créé une guerre à la drogue pour l'instant, le seul Mexique compte 20 à 30 000 morts liés au problème de la pression, de la demande de l'Amérique du Nord, principalement, sur les marchés. 20 ou 30 000 morts. Les démocraties d'Amérique centrale et d'Amérique sont menacées, et donc beaucoup d'anciens chefs d'État, le président Gaviria et d'autres ont adressé une demande, voire une supplique, pour que l'Amérique, l'Amérique du Nord et l'Europe réfléchissent sur le problème dramatique que fait peser sur leur démocratie le problème de la seule répression de l'offre.